Among the most extraordinary accounts in Scripture, there is one story that defies logic, war, and human understanding itself. A story where not human armies, military strategies, or political alliances determine the fate of a people. Instead, the unfolding events reveal a supernatural force, an angel sent by God who alone defeats 185,000 soldiers in a single night. Yes, you heard that right. One angel, one night, an entire army annihilated. Today, we're diving deep into this epic and often forgotten biblical story to understand its characters, their dilemmas, and above all, what this story teaches us about faith, obedience, and the power of God in the face of despair. So hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and get ready for a journey through one of the most powerful moments of Judeo-Christian faith. It all begins in a time of crisis in the ancient kingdom of Judah during the reign of King Hezekiah. The scene was tense, threatening. The Assyrian Empire, the most feared power on earth at the time, was advancing through neighboring territories with brutality and speed. Their conquests were indisputable, and their reputation for cruelty echoed through the lands. With each city they took, it seemed more certain that nothing and no one could stop them, and in this dark setting stands Hezekiah, a young king who took the throne at age 25, succeeding his father Ahaz. But unlike his father, Hezekiah was driven by deep faith. He didn't just want to rule, he wanted to reform, to restore the worship of the God of Israel, to tear down pagan altars, purify the temple, and spiritually rebuild the people. In the early years of his reign, Hezekiah summoned the priests and Levites and began a series of reforms that would forever alter Judah's spiritual course. The temple, once neglected, was reopened and purified. Sacred instruments were restored. And more than that, Hezekiah reinstituted the celebration of Passover, calling the people back to the true faith. These actions weren't just administrative decisions, they were acts of bravery. After all, it wasn't easy to confront a culture increasingly mixed with foreign practices and deeply rooted idolatry. But the king was determined. Either Judah returned to the God of their ancestors, or it would be lost. Among his most symbolic actions was the destruction of an ancient and controversial relic, the bronze serpent crafted by Moses centuries earlier. During the Israelites' journey through the desert, do you remember that story? When the people of Israel were attacked by venomous snakes, Moses, under God's command, raised a bronze serpent. Whoever was bitten and looked upon it with faith would be healed. It was a miracle, a symbol of salvation. But over time, the object began to be worshipped, revered as if the healing power came from the artifact itself, rather than from the God who ordered its creation. Recognizing this spiritual danger, Hezekiah made a bold and radical decision. He destroyed the serpent. He shattered it into pieces. He rejected the idolatry that had formed around that symbol and reaffirmed that only God is worthy of worship. Hezekiah's decision to destroy the bronze serpent wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was a rupture with a misguided past. That serpent, called Nehushtan, had become an idol among the people, a piece of metal to which powers were attributed that belonged solely to God. Hezekiah recognized the spiritual risk. Faith was being redirected from the creator to a created object. By taking this step, he not only affirmed his loyalty to God, but also demonstrated immense courage. Removing something so entrenched in the nation's tradition required conviction, and he did it with determination, tearing down pagan altars, breaking the images, destroying the Asherah poles, and grinding Nehushtan into dust. His message was clear: God alone is worthy of worship. But as Hezekiah was restoring Judah from within, a massive threat was growing from without. King Sennacherib, the ruler of the Assyrian Empire, had already conquered many cities and regions. Now his eyes were fixed on Jerusalem. To him, it was just another target, another prize for his expanding empire. The Assyrian army was unlike any other. It was known for its brutal tactics, ruthless efficiency, and psychological warfare. They didn't just defeat their enemies, they humiliated them. They decapitated kings, exiled populations, and looted entire cities. Fear spread wherever they marched. Alarmed by the looming invasion, Hezekiah sought a diplomatic solution. He sent messengers to Sennacherib offering a peace treaty in exchange for tribute, gold and silver, even taken from the temple of the Lord. It was a desperate act, a heavy price to avoid war. But what seemed like a truce turned out to be a trap. Sennacherib accepted the payment, but not the terms. He took the treasure and marched forward. He wanted more than riches. He wanted submission, and not just political. He sought to prove that even the God of Israel was powerless against him, and here is where he made his fatal mistake. Instead of simply attacking, Sennacherib mocked. He sent a letter to Hezekiah filled with arrogance and blasphemy. In it, he declared that none of the gods of other nations had saved their worshippers, and Israel would be no different. Hezekiah, upon receiving the letter, didn't respond with rage or panic. He responded with prayer. He took the letter to the temple and laid it before God. In tears he cried out, not for vengeance, but for divine intervention, that God would defend his own name, that the world would see that there was, indeed, a living God in Israel. At that moment, the prophet Isaiah entered the story. He sent a divine message to Hezekiah. Do not be afraid of what you have heard. Those words with which the king of Assyria's servants have blasphemed me, I will cause him to return by the same path. It was the beginning of a supernatural deliverance, one no one, not even Hezekiah, could have imagined. Isaiah's words came like a balm to Hezekiah's anguished heart. Amid fear, pressure, and the looming threat of destruction, hearing directly from the prophet that God was aware, that he had heard every insult and seen every blasphemy, reignited hope. Isaiah didn't just promise that Sennacherib would fail to conquer Jerusalem. He declared the king would return the same way he came, without setting foot in the holy city. But the prophet went even further. To strengthen Hezekiah's faith, God offered a sign. And what a sign it was. The shadow on the sundial of Ahaz, a fixed symbol of time's passage, would move backward 10 degrees, a phenomenon defying all laws of nature and physics. But that's exactly what happened. Hezekiah saw with his own eyes time reverse, not as a metaphor, but as a visible, undeniable act of divine power. This sign wasn't just a show of strength, it was an act of compassion. God knew the emotional toll Hezekiah was under, the burden of leading a people on the edge of annihilation. And rather than demanding blind faith, he gave tangible proof, a reminder that he was present, active, and resolute in defending his people. Meanwhile, the siege of Jerusalem continued. The Assyrian soldiers remained encamped, confident in their inevitable victory. They had no idea they were already defeated, not by weapons or tactics, but by a power invisible to human eyes, the will of God. Then came the night that changed everything. The Bible recounts the moment in few words, but with overwhelming impact. In 2 Kings 19:35, it is written, "That night the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 in the Assyrian camp." When the people got up the next morning, there were all the dead bodies, one angel, one night, 185,000 soldiers gone. The text doesn't detail how it happened. There's no mention of battles, lightning or flaming swords, just a declaration that the angel acted silently, precisely, with absolute authority. When the surviving Assyrian soldiers awoke, all they saw around them was death. Fallen comrades, lifeless bodies, an army dismantled by divine force. Jerusalem was spared. No wall had to fall, no sword was raised, no blood was shed by the hands of Judah's men, because this battle was fought and won by God alone. Sennacherib, upon hearing the news, fled, humiliated, his arrogance crushed not by human hands, but by an invisible judgment he could never comprehend. Though he continued ruling Assyria for a few more years, his legacy was forever stained by this supernatural defeat. The Bible doesn't describe Sennacherib's end, but historical records tell us that years later he was assassinated by two of his own sons while worshipping in a pagan temple. A cruel irony. The man who mocked the God of Israel died at the altar of a God who could not save him. What happened that night wasn't just a military triumph. It was a revelation, a timeless reminder to the world and to future generations that true power doesn't lie in armies, weapons, or political alliances. It lies in God, a God who sees, who hears, and who acts, a God who, when sincerely invoked, intervenes in undeniable ways. The people of Jerusalem, waking to find the enemy army mysteriously vanished, were stunned. No one immediately understood what had happened. But as the story spread, one truth became undeniable. The God of Israel had fought for them and won. Hezekiah, witnessing his city spared from destruction, didn't seek glory for himself. Instead, he gave thanks to the Lord, acknowledging that the victory belonged entirely to him. That moment didn't just save a city, it reignited the people's faith and reverence for their God. With the threat behind him, Hezekiah continued to reign wisely. He took advantage of the peace to implement further reforms. He reinforced Jerusalem's defenses, constructed reservoirs, and expanded the city's outer walls. Above all, he kept true worship at the heart of Judah's life. But not all trials were behind him. Hezekiah later faced a personal crisis, a sudden illness that brought him to the brink of death. Once again, he turned to what he knew best, prayer. In tears, he pleaded for more time, for mercy, for another chance. And God answered. Isaiah returned to the palace with a new message. Hezekiah would live. Not only that, God granted him 15 more years of life, and once again, the same supernatural sign of the reversed shadow confirmed it. Hezekiah, for the second time, witnessed an undeniable miracle. During those added years, he worked to prepare Jerusalem for the future. However, his successor, his son Manasseh, did not follow in his footsteps. Upon taking the throne, Manasseh led Judah back into idolatry, rebuilding the pagan altars his father had destroyed and turning the people away from the true God. Even so, Hezekiah's legacy was not erased. His name remains recorded among the kings who most pleased the Lord, a man who did not trust in swords, but in prayer, who did not rule with fear, but with faith, and who witnessed the impossible not once, but twice. The story of Hezekiah and the angel who destroyed 185,000 soldiers is more than an impressive biblical episode. It is a calling, an invitation to all of us, especially in uncertain times, to remember that when we place our trust in the Lord, no force on earth can stand against us. If you've stayed with us this far, it's because this story touched you. So don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. And of course, stay with us. There's much more ahead on this channel. May God bless your life powerfully. See you next time.